The clash at Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876, stands among the most significant indigenous military successes against American forces. It pitted the 7th Cavalry, commanded by General George Armstrong Custer, against a vast coalition of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho combatants. While many fierce indigenous men fought, the lore surrounding one particular fighter depicts an exceptionally fearsome war chief who alarmed even veteran troops. Within the event's historical narrative, two indigenous figures are preeminent: Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Sitting Bull served mainly as a strategic and spiritual guide. In a Sundance ritual preceding the conflict, he experienced a prophetic vision of soldiers descending into the Lakota encampment, like insects, an omen widely seen as predicting a monumental triumph. Recuperating from the ritualistic wounds of the Sundance, Sitting Bull did not engage in direct combat, instead dedicating his efforts to motivating the men and managing the village. Crazy Horse, in contrast, was the principal operational commander during the engagement. Indigenous reports uniformly commend Crazy Horse's bravery and his skill in directing assaults that encircled, overwhelmed, and finally annihilated Custer's unit. Yet, historical record does not designate Sitting Bull or Crazy Horse as the most fearsome indigenous combatant from Little Bighorn. That distinction is awarded to a man whose very name inspired profound fear in adversaries and allies alike. Descriptions from U.S. military and indigenous sources alike portray a fighter of tremendous physical strength and a near-mythical intensity in combat. His visage, adorned with paint and possessing an unnerving, steely gaze, was reputed to instill pure terror in troops before he even commenced his attack. For numerous Lakota, he represented a storm gathering on the fight's periphery. To the U.S. Army, he constituted a far more sinister threat, an entity of pure dread given human form, a combatant who battled not merely with bravery, but with a savage, inexorable animosity. His identity was Rain in the Face. His birth occurred in the early 1830s, close to the confluence of the Cheyenne River in what is now South Dakota, as a member of the Hunkpapa Lakota. During his youth, he was raised in a culture that bound a young Lakota man's destiny to his valor, swiftness, and prowess. Similar to others in his cohort, he was instructed in horsemanship nearly as early as he was in walking. He acquired the skill to trail deer across the plains, to rest without a sound, and to bear deprivation without protest. His initial bow was a plaything for a child. His subsequent one became an instrument for a hunter. Upon reaching adolescence, he had probably commenced his vision quest, a ceremonial ordeal involving fasting, solitude, and the pursuit of a connection with the spiritual realm. In his childhood, he was identified by another name, one lost to more than a century and a half of time. The name known today was gained during a combat incident, possibly a clash with a Crow warband, or an incursion into rival lands. Indigenous accounts state he came back from the fight, his countenance marked by streams of blood and rain. Certain versions claimed it was his own blood, combined with the chilling downpour of that day. Others maintained it was the blood of his foes, etched into stark trails by the storm, adorning him like battle paint. An observing senior warrior bestowed upon him the name Itayomagazu, Rain in the Face. For the Lakota, names were not decorative, they were declarations of essence. Once attained, they held significant force, and this particular one suited him perfectly. Rain in the Face was an appellation not just recalled, but dreaded. From that point onward, he was transformed from a youth carrying a bow into a man whose name would soon resonate throughout the territory. By the middle of the 1860s, Rain in the Face had already grown infamous. He was probably a participant in Red Cloud's War from 1866 to 1868, specifically in assaults on military posts like Fort Phil Kearny, where the Lakota and allied tribes effectively opposed the establishment of the Bozeman Trail. Some narratives propose his potential involvement in the 1866 Fetterman engagement, though his specific capacity remains unclear. His verified location in the Powder River area throughout this time renders it a strong possibility. During the 1870s, Rain in the Face was also a combatant in the 1873 engagement at Honsinger Bluff near the Yellowstone River. In this skirmish with Custer's troops, he was accused of slaying Dr. John Honsinger and the settler Augustus Belaine. His subsequent arrest for these murders was conducted by Captain Thomas Custer, the younger sibling of George Custer, who reportedly supervised the shackling of Rain in the Face personally at Fort Abraham Lincoln. As recounted by Rain in the Face, Tom Custer assaulted him with kicks and slaps while he was bound, confining him in a bare cell with merely a thin blanket for the entirety of a frigid winter. This treatment was simultaneously agonizing and demeaning, an indignity that etched itself permanently into his memory. He managed to flee the fort not long after, and his subsequent days were consumed by fantasies of retribution. This vengeance would be realized in the summer of 1876 at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The conflict itself served as the brutal culmination of prolonged strain and treachery. The U.S. government, driven by manifest destiny and a conviction that Western settlement was a God-given entitlement, advanced incessantly into native lands. Agreements were negotiated and subsequently violated, frequently with calculated disregard. The 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty was ratified to maintain peace between Plains tribes and the increasing stream of migrants traveling the Oregon Trail. It designated extensive territorial borders for the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and other indigenous nations, yet was almost immediately disregarded. Newcomers trespassed into guaranteed territories, railways cut through vital buffalo grounds, and governing authorities took minimal action to prevent it. A subsequent treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 pledged the Lakota Sioux sole authority over the Great Sioux Reservation, encompassing the spiritually paramount Black Hills. These guarantees were intended to endure permanently in exchange for the Lakota agreeing to stay within the reservation and end assaults on settlers. However, an 1874 expedition commanded by Custer confirmed gold discoveries in the Black Hills. A rush of prospectors, miners, and colonists ensued almost instantly. Rather than expel these interlopers, the federal government attempted to purchase the territory from the Lakota. Upon the refusal of Sitting Bull and other leaders to sell, the U.S. government issued an ultimatum, branding all indigenous people outside reservation boundaries as hostile and commanding their return to assigned agencies by January 31, 1876. Predictably, a great number defied this order. They instead assembled into what was, by certain accounts, the most immense indigenous gathering the Plains had ever witnessed. Thousands of individuals, men, women, and children, established a vast village near the Little Bighorn River in what is now southeastern Montana. It was into this sprawling encampment that the 7th Cavalry advanced on June 25, 1876. George Custer commanded over 600 troops in an assertive strategy designed to surround and disperse the native forces. Overconfident in his tactical skill and scornful of indigenous military power, Custer split his command into 3 distinct battalions, aiming to assault rapidly and block any escape. He disastrously misjudged, however, that this was not a minor band of refugees, but a formidable and ready army. When Custer's battalion neared from the east, a counteroffensive was launched as warriors streamed from the camp. The fighting ignited with abrupt and intense ferocity. Custer and his immediate unit of approximately 210 men became cut off and profoundly outflanked. Mounted warriors under leaders such as Crazy Horse, Two Moons, and Rain in the Face conducted successive, swift assaults. The scene was one of churning dust, cries, the crack of rifles, and the rumble of charging horses as Custer's troops were rapidly subdued. The soldiers attempted to establish defensive lines on a rise now called Last Stand Hill, but the indigenous combatants encircled them, leveraging their superior understanding of the landscape to lethal advantage. Custer's entire detachment was annihilated. No soldier from his direct command survived the engagement, including Custer. The specific actions of Rain in the Face during the fight swiftly became the stuff of legend. One pervasive account alleged that Rain in the Face was responsible for the deaths of both George Custer and his brother, Captain Thomas Custer, who was also present. As rumor told it, he carved out Tom Custer's heart in a furious act of retribution for the humiliations he had endured during his captivity at Fort Abraham Lincoln. From that day forward to the U.S. military, Rain in the Face was transformed into a dreadful phantom menacing the fringes of the expanding frontier. Yet the figure behind these terrifying accounts was far more complex. Rain in the Face may have been a figure of dread in combat, but like countless warriors, his motivation was not violence for its own sake. He was protecting his community, his hereditary lands, and his entire culture. Following the victory at Little Bighorn, Rain in the Face retreated with other Hunkpapa fighters into the Powder River region, navigating the borderlands of Wyoming and Montana. They evaded pursuit by traversing ancient buffalo paths and well-known hunting territories. He journeyed with bands faithful to Sitting Bull and Gall, maintaining constant movement to avoid being surrounded. Their survival depended on concealed stores of preserved food, nights spent without fire, and the sanctuary of isolated landscapes. These were times defined by weariness and starvation, where the triumph of Little Bighorn was rapidly replaced by a bleak fight for existence. In 1877, after Crazy Horse capitulated and Sitting Bull escaped north into Canada, Rain in the Face remained with a group that continued to roam the lands just south of the border. He eventually returned to the plains in the 1880s, spending his final years on the Standing Rock Reservation. He lived a subdued life, never again raising a weapon, though he persisted as an icon of defiance for a younger generation of Lakota. He was known to converse with visitors and reporters about his life, at times with hesitation and at other times with candor. He repeatedly refuted the infamous story that he had excised Tom Custer's heart, a tale given lasting life by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, The Revenge of Rain in the Face. While he acknowledged his role in the battle, he asserted the more horrific specifics were inventions. Whether his denial was truthful remains an enduring mystery. The saga of Rain in the Face persists to this day. He is recalled as a combatant of immense stature and fearsome capability, but also as an individual molded by the turbulent and inequitable era of his life. At his death in 1905, he was no longer the specter that haunted cavalrymen's stories. He was an elder whose physical strength had waned, whose recollections were dimming, but whose name still ignited an ember of dread or reverence in all who heard it spoken. His final resting place was at Standing Rock, marked not by grand ceremony or public spectacle, but with a quiet dignity, a fate he shared with countless others who had struggled against an inexorable tide. Yet, even within that acknowledged defeat, there persists a peculiar form of triumph. The simple, enduring fact that Rain in the Face is not forgotten. His name, once a whisper of terror on the wind, now echoes as a testament to a fierce and unyielding spirit, ensuring that the story of his people's resistance continues to be told. And so, the legend of Rain in the Face endures. Not as a mere monster from a soldier's nightmare, but as something far more powerful. A symbol of resistance, of a people's fierce love for their homeland, and of the terrifying cost of taking it from them. He was buried not as a boogeyman, but as a man, a complex soul forged in the fire of injustice, who fought to hold back an inevitable tide. And while that tide eventually rolled in, his story never washed away. It remains, challenging us to look beyond the myth and remember the man who became a myth for a reason. But what do you think? Was he the heart-cutting avenger of legend, or a warrior unfairly demonized by a nation seeking a villain? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell for more stories lost to history, but not forgotten.